I am Dustin Sweeten, and I'm the owner of Powerhouse Motorsports in Pleasant Grove, Utah. I've been snowmobiling since I was 5 years old in 1967. At the time, my father was he was the Western States sales manager for Rupp Manufacturing, and so I kind of grew up with Rupp and snowmobiles, and I had new ones around all the time, and so I guess I took it pretty seriously right from the start because I was involved all the time there. But when he left Rupp, which would have been in the early 70s, about 1972, then I had a little bit of a drought of not having snowmobiles, and he brought home a few old ones in between and said, if you can get them running, you can ride them. And so I'd get those going. And then finally, when I turned 16, I was able to get my own job. And I got a job bagging groceries and bought my first Rupp, which was 2 years old at the time. It was a 1976 Rupp Nitro. And from then on, I was pretty hooked, and I always had a snowmobile. It wasn't until 1989 that I got the desire to race, and so I started racing in the Rocky Mountain cross-country circuit and doing a few snow crosses, and then I got involved in ovals, which became really my passion, and enjoyed ovals for quite a few years until they stopped running those in Utah, and then I started doing snow cross and then hill climbs because that's where the popularity went. But I've been pretty involved in that. I started my business in 1989 and involved in snowmobiles and as a snowmobile dealership, and then sold that later in 2001 and started my current dealership, which is Powerhouse Motorsports. So I've been passionate about snowmobiles basically since I was 5 years old. I have about 150 snowmobiles that are 1978 or older. Outside I have quite a few different ones that are duplicates of ones I might have that I would sell or not sell depending on which models they are. But then when we go to the inside of the buildings, I'm trying to collect, because my dad worked for Rupp and I grew up with Rupp, I'm trying to collect any Rupp I can find. So I'm always interested in Rupps. I've got about 45 Rupps right now, and then I'm trying to collect one of every brand. Not too many people realize, if they haven't been in snowmobiling for a long time, how many brands there actually were of snowmobiles. In 1971, there were over 200 manufacturers in the United States and Canada. Then in the early 70s, we had the oil embargo, a lot of bad winters, and they started dropping like flies. And to put in perspective, in 2013, the manufacturers sold about 48,000 snowmobiles. In 1971, they sold 617,000 snowmobiles. So everybody was involved. Coleman, Evinrude, anybody you can think of, Sears, any company you can think of made a snowmobile. And so that's what we've evolved down from, but there are so many different machines out there. And so that's my goal, is to try and collect one of every brand. And so in my large barn, I have one of every brand, and then my Rupps, and then I've got another place I call the Cat House, which is a bunch of old cats. I've got another place that I've got Rupps displayed of one of each year, but they're not quite as nice as my other ones, so they're covered but not completely enclosed. So you can, anywhere you look, you're going to find old vintage snowmobiles. As far as the judging, they have kind of an organization that they determine what they consider snowmobiles. Anything 1968 and older is considered antique. Anything 1969 to 1988 is considered vintage. Anything beyond 88 they consider just a snowmobile. It's not really considered in their judging and that kind of thing. So that's kind of what they use as a guideline for years and what they consider vintage or antique. Some of the challenges you hit in trying to maintain older snowmobiles, one is parts availability. Luckily we have the blessing of eBay. And because everybody out there is buying old snowmobiles and taking them apart and putting these parts on eBay, so if you have a part you can't find, pretty good bet you can find it on eBay. When I'm restoring something, I like to find as many leftover new parts, and there are a lot of those out there also on eBay and other sources, to put machines together to make them as close to new as I possibly can. But if you're just trying to take an old sled and make it runnable, one of the challenges you hit, if you have a new 2013 snowmobile and you have a piston go down and it's going to cost $700 or $800 to fix it, it's a no-brainer. You're going to fix it. If you have a machine that's a 1972 and it's worth about $200 and it needs $700 worth of work, you're probably not going to take it into the shop to get fixed. So you're probably going to fix it yourself or not. Maybe you'll become a parts machine. So that's one of the challenges, is the value of the machine versus what the repair might cost. You might not be willing to spend that kind of money. So you have to be careful how much you spend on fixing up these old machines, because you can get into a lot of money in a hurry and maybe not have a machine worth as much as you spend to fix it. I have basically three different ways I go with the snowmobiles I collect. If the snowmobile is in good original condition, I'll just try to freshen it up, clean it up, and leave it as it is because it was kept quite well. Or I'll try to fix one up to make it a rider. And in that case, I'll try to make it look nice, but I'm more worried about getting all the mechanicals correct. We have some vintage races, and so that's what I use, is that kind of machine. Then there's the full restoration, like the one I got ready for the show last year that I took to Yellowstone into our Intermountain show. That one is a whole different world. That's like the one I'm doing right here, right now, is I pretty much strip it down completely to the chassis. At that point, when I spend that much time, it's now a display piece and I'm unlikely to ride it. So if I'm looking for replacement parts as I'm doing a restoration, once again, if I were doing just a rider, I would look for probably some used parts because I want to be as cheap as I can into the machine. If I'm trying to make a full restoration like this one, my preference is to find leftover new parts. And there are quite a few out there on the internet that you can find, because I would like to replace every part I can with an original part if possible. There's also a lot of great companies out there making reproductions. They make hoods, they make decals. If it weren't for the graphic places making decals, that's something that even if you had one from back in the 60s and 70s, it probably wouldn't be any good anymore because the adhesive wouldn't work or anything. So that's a great blessing, is to have these reproduction decals where we can make these look just like brand new, and like they did in the showroom floor, or maybe even better at times. Different collectors and restoration people have different views on how they ought to restore them. There are some people I've talked to that said you have to use every original nut and bolt that was on it. So you're polishing and shining each thing because you want all those original parts. And if not, you find something that was an original part. They believe that using reproduction parts doesn't make it original. I'm personally not of that mindset. I think whatever I have to get or do, whatever process, we have a lot better technology now than they had back in the 60s and 70s. I'll use whatever I can to make that snowmobile look just as nice as possible, because I want it to be something I'm proud of, or if I'm doing it for someone else, I want them to be proud of it. As you know, most of the time, if you leave just your brand new snowmobile for the year and you don't stabilize the fuel, it's probably not going to start. So the majority of the snowmobiles, if I just went out and pulled the starter rope, they probably wouldn't start. But if I spend a few minutes or a few hours going through the carburetor and putting new fuel in and everything, probably about 70% of my machines would start, and the rest would take a lot more work. We do a vintage snowcross here in Utah, and when I say snowcross, I'm not talking about the new snowcrosses where you're 30 feet in the air. If you took one of these old leaf spring machines 30 feet in the air, you'd die and it'd break into pieces when you landed. And so when you hit any bumps, you're all over the place. You feel like you're out of control half the time. That's half the fun. Of course, the speeds aren't as high, so I don't think the danger's there. And the biggest draw for these vintage races is you can go spend $200 or $300 on a snowmobile and go have fun racing for a day or for a couple days. And you can be competitive. If I go racing now, I've got to spend $15,000, $20,000 on a sled and spend a lot more getting it ready to be competitive. So that's the fun draw. This is back kind of grassroots snowmobile racing, is like we used to be able to, you could bring your trail set and ride and have fun. So you can take this sled with not a lot of work, go have a good time and be competitive with everybody else. That's the draw. So if you're interested in starting to restore sleds or collect sleds, there's a lot of associations out there. We have a state one here in Utah. We have a western one that's for the western U.S. There's one in each of the local states. They all work well together and everything. They have shows. We have the Intermountain show that displays a lot of vintage sleds. West Yellowstone has a great show up there as part of the expo. And so the best way to start is maybe start with a machine that's not as valuable. There's some machines out there, especially race machines, like an old King Cat that might be worth $10,000 to $15,000 restored. But you don't need to get into that kind of thing. You can find one in your neighbor's backyard in an old barn, and I would say start with something that's more common, like a Panther or an old Skidoo Olympic, something like that, that you can practice on, and you can see how well you can make that. You might spend more time on it than the machine's worth when you're done, but part of the enjoyment of this is just the doing it, taking it apart and everything. It's not, I've done some car restorations, and these take far less time because they're much smaller with fewer parts. And so just about anybody that wants to get involved can get involved, because almost everybody knows of some snowmobile sitting out behind a barn or out in somebody's field that you could use for a restoration. There's a lot of trading, and there's a lot of people that help people out. Pretty much everybody out there in the local area and in the western area know that I collect RUPs. So if they see one, they call me. But I usually know what they're looking for too. They might be looking for certain Polarises or certain Skidoos. And we try to keep a lookout for each other. It's not really a competition as much as it is helping everybody out. And often I'll have somebody call me and say, hey, I've got something that you want and you have something I want. Would you trade me? And almost always, unless it's something that's dear to my heart, I'd be willing to trade them.